Hi, everyone. Welcome to our November webinar. My name is Amanda Rossi, and I am the Media Alliance of Houston president, and we are glad to have all of you here with us today. Our November webinar is brought to you by Brivik Media, and I would like to welcome Alan Brivik, the president of Brivik Media.
Thank you, Amanda. I was excited about today's topic. We're going to speak about ratings. When I started out, we basically had in each home one device to watch programming. It was called a television in the living room. And everybody watched the same TV, and you had a choice of 3 networks and 1 indie, maybe, if you were lucky. And at that time, we questioned the validity of the results of the ratings that came up from a very simple task of 4 options, all live viewership, 1 device. Well, today we've got an unlimited number of devices. We have an unlimited number of programming sources. People can watch live, people can time shift, people share passwords with each other, so we're not quite sure who's watching. So it's a huge task. And I'm really curious how we're going to keep track of this and have faith in the numbers. And hopefully by the end of today's luncheon, we'll all feel much better about it and know much more. So with that, I think I used up my minute. So.
Thanks, Alan, and thank you to Brivik Media for sponsoring today's webinar. We would like to thank all of our corporate sponsors, Odyssey, Brivik Media, Carlberg, Centro, Clear Channel, Effective, iHeart, KHOU, KIAH, KTRK, Love Advertising, and MMI. We're also getting ready to start our membership drive for 2022, so be on the lookout for emails regarding that. For those of you that are 3 or less years in the industry or have coworkers that are 3 or less years in the industry, we're having our November Making Access Happen event with KHOU coming up. We're still determining the exact date that that will be, so be on the lookout for updates through email and social media. And we are very excited to announce our Star Awards Gala for 2022. Media Alliance is celebrating their 70th year, and we will be celebrating on February 10th, 2022 at the Post Oak Hotel. We're really excited to get back into being able to celebrate Gala again and to celebrate with all of the industry. So be on the lookout for updates. Voting is going to be starting soon for Gala, for Star Awards as well. So be on the lookout for more details and get ready to buy tables and to celebrate for a very fun event. So now I will turn it over to Chris Caldwell, the Vice President of Programming, who will introduce our speaker for today's webinar.
Chris, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Welcome to the November luncheon featuring Nielsen Media Research. Nielsen last spoke to our group less than a year ago, but a lot has changed during that time. We'll hear about pandemic media consumption habits, MRC accreditation, measurement of broadband-only homes, and the new currency of impressions-based buying. We will be discussing both audio and video. Following the presentation, we will have a Q&A, which I will moderate. If you have any questions, please ask them in the group chat. You can either direct message me or have everybody see it. I will now announce our 2 Nielsen speakers. Many of you may recognize our first one. Her name is Monica Narvaez. She is Vice President of Client Solutions based here in Houston. She has worked for Arbitron and Nielsen for over 17 years. During this time, she has specialized in audio, Scarborough data, Hispanic media consumption. She currently services agency and direct advertiser clients in the Texas region for all Nielsen products. Monica is a native Houstonian. She interned at KHOU and Telemundo while she was in college at the University of Houston. She lives in the Spring area with her husband, Darwin, son, Alex, and 3 pets. Our second speaker is Claudine Sokol. She is Vice President of Client Solutions based in Los Angeles. She has been with Nielsen for over 23 years, working with national and local media, mobile, movies, digital, TV, and audio. Claudine has helped convert media markets across the Southwest to electronic measurement since the late 90s and is committed to helping her clients understand the ongoing changes in the media industry. Claudine is a graduate of Yeshiva University in New York City. She is born and raised in LA, where she currently resides with her 4 children and Luna the dog. Please join me in welcoming Monica Narvaez and Claudine Sokol.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Can somebody give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Great. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time today to join us and to listen about what we want to share with you all in regards to the latest Nielsen measurement. As it regards to local media and specifically from my hometown, Houston, Texas, as viewing and listening habits continue to change and evolve, it is also critical that our measurement evolves and changes with it so that the metrics can continue to reflect the marketplace as best as possible. As we rebranded and go through a transformation ourselves, the important thing to note is that audiences continue to be everything to us. And from the brands to the advertisers and the consumers, it's important to continue to understand how it continues to evolve and change. So with that, I like to go through our agenda for today. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the presentation? Great. Okay. So for today, we are going to, Claudine and I are going to take you through a lot of content. We will leave time for questions. So please, we encourage you to also reach out to your Nielsen representative, whether it be Melanie Morris, Lisa Trevino, or myself, if you'd like to have a deeper dive or conversation about any of our insights today, trends, or even the concepts that we're going to share. And I will start today with the state of the radio, and then I will pass it to Claudine, who will present us with the latest news about how we're including broadband-only media consumers. And then also we're going to be closing with a discussion of how the media industry is going through its own transformation from how we traditionally look at ratings to now looking at impressions, both from a planning and buying perspective. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm going to start with radio. And as we continue to recover from 2020, so does radio listening. Nielsen did a sentiment study, a survey where we found that the confidence of consumers has returned throughout the country. Houston is no different. We're returning to a sense of normalcy in terms of we're starting to see more people going back to work, working from offices, commute times are up. And as you can also see that radio listening is also growing and increasing, particularly with our heavy listeners returning to radio, which is very positive. And it's a result, again, of commuter times, keeping in mind that this is because the majority of radio consumption is being done in cars. And therefore we do and will continue to see those levels surge. When we look at not just the levels in terms of time spent listening in the car and listening, we also see that reach continues to be very strong. And you can see here that even prior to the COVID levels, you had a sense of, is radio listening going to return to its pivotal moment? And in terms of weekly reach across all of the PPM markets, including Houston, this month of October that just released, you see the surge coming right back up to the levels right before COVID. So from a reach perspective, we see a very positive recovery across all PPM markets. In terms of the AQH trend, it's similar in terms of October being at its all-time high. One of the things that we look at with AQH is, remember, now we're taking into consideration the time spent. And as we've talked about that, we're just starting to see with October that surge come back up at a 7.8 across all PPM markets, which is very close to that 8.1 back prior to COVID. Okay, so moving a little bit into Houston insights and trying to see, is the same happening on a national perspective as well as in Houston? And I can also say that from a weekly perspective, in terms how many listeners are tuning into radio, absolutely, we do see it starting to come back up. It's a little bit more flat and consistent throughout the year in terms of month to month. But again, in October, we did see a little bit of an increase. And then in terms of AQH, you can see that AQH had actually been consistently coming down in terms of how many people were listening on average, but October, we definitely saw a rebound. And again, I think that's going back in line with the other markets that are seeing increases in terms of people listening to radio. Okay, something that's interesting to me and specific to Houston. So when we think about radio formats and performance, and really what are the formats that I say survived COVID? Because we really did have a lot of radio stations try and understand how do they, take events and promote events differently. How do they talk to their on-air talent about what's relevant? So there was definitely in Houston some formats that continue to maintain listening throughout the 2020 and even 21. So if you look from October of last year to October of this year, the top 5 formats are Mexican regional, news, talk, information, country, contemporary Christian, and Spanish adult hits. And I want to pause here for a second and look at those formats, and what you'll see in common is that the shares did go up from last year till now. And also, when we look nationally, Mexican regional is not in the top 5 formats. So Mexican regional is very strong here in Houston. So is Spanish adult hits. News, talk, information has been strong across all markets, and even in Houston. We saw news talk formats increase because of COVID and other political content. Country, always strong in Houston. And then contemporary Christian definitely has seen an increase month over month from a 5.8 to 6 to 7. And it's maintained a little bit over 7, came down by 6.6. But that just means to me that it's inspiration listeners are looking for. And a lot of those stations have done a really tremendous job even throughout COVID. Okay, so I want to turn it over to Claudine to share some insights about local television here in Houston.
Thanks so much, Monica. So you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. I think the first thing we have to do is establish the fact that this has been the last 20 months unheard of, right? When I spoke to you last time, we were in the midst of the pandemic and we're starting to see some things. A lot of what we've heard about, that Alan briefly mentioned, was the fact that there's so much out there. The story of the pandemic has been streaming, and that's like, it seems like that's all there is. But what we started doing at Nielsen was both on a national level, and this is called The Gauge. We produced this on a monthly level, and we started doing this. The first one we produced was back in December 2020, and then we started producing them monthly since May. And what we saw was that it's not the same every month, and there's definitely changes. So streaming is a lot, right? So during the pandemic, you had the launch of HBO Max, Peacock, Discovery Plus, you had a rebranding of Paramount Plus, and you've had other launches during the time. You had the launch and death of Quibi, and you had other things that were evolving. And the fact of the matter is that even as we look at the snapshot from September, what we don't see here is that there's a gain in broadcast of 2% from August to September. And I think what's really important to remember here is that, if we look at where we were last November, so the new fall season for 2020 versus this fall season, we had a truncated sports session that started in the summer because of all the sports stopping in March. Then you had a 29-day delay of the new fall season last year versus this year. And you had last year 79% increase in repeats on broadcast television. This year, a different story. In just the month of September, from August to September, you've had much higher NFL ratings, and you had a return of new broadcast content. So I think this, what it also tells you is that roughly between broadcast and cable, still the majority of content being out there, whether it's here in Houston or across the country, remains on ad-supported programming. Go ahead. Advance. Great. The other thing that you have to notice, and this is really the state of the nation, is that there's been a change. Think about your own lives. Think about how you might have viewed 5, 10 years ago, right? You know, I used to call them the box TVs, but my son had turned 17. The year he was born, we bought a plasma TV, and we spent so much money. It was like the cost of more than our mortgage in LA. And I like refuse to give it up, even though all the colors are yellow, because I keep waiting for my depreciation. But the reality is you can go today to Amazon, to Walmart for $230, buy a wonderful smart TV with every single app loaded on there. And what we've seen is over the last 10 years is there's been a change in how people are getting their content. But what's happened is that this really became more rapid in the last 2 years. And you can see here in 2021, over 18.5% of Americans are broadband only. So these aren't just people who are cord cutting because of lack of content. These are people that are evolving, that they've said, you know, I don't necessarily want to pay for cable or satellite, but I still want content. So they're finding other ways to consume their content that doesn't include a subscription to cable or satellite. Another thing that's been amazing has been the onset of over the air. That continues to grow across the country. Digital antennas, how people can access those beautiful digital signals that your local channels are putting out there. And because there's so many more channels. Here in Los Angeles, we have over 52 over-the-air channels. Okay, the other growth is that VMVPD, which stands for Virtual Multi-Channel Video Programming Distributor. An MVPD is a fancy way of saying you're getting a lot of content delivered to the home through a set-top box. So like cable or satellite boxes. When you put the word virtual, you're saying you're getting the same thing, but now you're getting it through an app. So think about YouTube TV, Fubo TV, DirecTV streaming, Hulu Live. Those are all. And that's the other thing you see here is that tremendous growth as people are saying, hey, I'm still like, maybe like for here in Los Angeles, I'm here a Spectrum user, but I can also have the Spectrum app. I don't necessarily need the equipment. And the other thing that you're seeing is that this shrinking of the traditional cable and satellite footprint. They're still getting their content out. And in fact, in the last third quarter review, many of the cable and satellite companies announced that they got more subscribers to their broadband and different offerings. It's just, again, we're still consuming a lot of content. It's just changing. The other thing I'll draw your attention is that this broadband only, that red, we've had it in the national sample since 2013. This isn't our first rodeo. So putting it into local markets like Houston is not going to be a difficult thing because we've already had them and we've seen their behavior. And what we noticed was, wow, they're watching local content. How can that be? So I'm going to explain to you how broadband only homes can get local content. Next slide. So the next thing we want to look at here is the fact that not everything's gloomy in the terms of broadcast television, again, because you're hearing all about this streaming. The fact of the matter is, even today, that any broadcast station, I'm sorry, it got cut off, but has almost an 80% reach in this marketplace, or premium cable, almost a 70% reach. That's what's really interesting, is that even though you're hearing a lot about these wonderful things, Netflix, Hulu, all these things, the reality is that in terms of reach and weekly viewing, broadcast and local cable continue to have a very strong presence in the marketplace. Go ahead. The other thing is during COVID, one more back. During this time, what we've seen is a lot of how the different categories. So first, let me draw your attention to that green line. That's political advertising, organizational advertising. Obviously, it went down. It'll probably go back up as the midterms, and you'll have a contested governor election in Texas as well. The other area, that blue line, is retail. So retail definitely has had a comeback. We definitely saw at the beginning of COVID, which is down, and we've seen it come back. Obviously, there's pressures on the supply chain. A lot of people, my daughters keep telling me I should buy all their gifts now for the holidays because they're afraid of supply chain issues. They've also been, so they're very kind to alert me of that. The other thing that you'll see here is that orange line, that darker orange line, that's engineering professional services. So that's legal services, insurance services, but it also includes home improvement. And we'll talk a little bit about that, how that continues to be a very strong category. We expect automotive, that gray line, to come back when the supply chain frees up. You know, you guys probably know better than I do. Dealers who usually had 250 cars on a lot are now struggling with 50 or less cars on a lot to provide to people. So really healthy categories. And when you get this deck, you'll be able to really deep dive into that. Next slide. A big area here in Houston is your healthcare, right? And so we've had these concerns that a lot of people did not do or utilize the healthcare during this last COVID round, afraid to go see their regular doctor checkups. This really has been an issue. And what we're seeing here is that we're seeing very healthy use of hospitals, of seeing specialists in the marketplace. Beyond healthcare, there's also home improvement. As I mentioned, over almost $1.5 billion spent in the past year. So that's people deciding, we're working from home, I've been stuck at home, I want to improve my environment, whether it's landscaping, maybe changing out the wallpaper or painting, carpeting, watching a lot of YouTube videos of how to do it yourself, remodeling a bathroom, or even exterior paint, beautifying. What we've seen is this has been a consistent, I've done this is my 63rd webinar or presentation across the country, and home improvement has been the one category that continues to outperform. So let's now get into actual local measurement in this marketplace. So I want to start off by addressing some of the concerns of what you've heard in the news with the MRC accreditation and everything. Let me be very clear. Nielsen was accredited in this market in Houston in October 2019. Okay, and that accreditation was suspended as of September 15th of this year. That suspension lasted for 30 days. So we are out of suspension, and we are actively working with the MRC and our auditors to resubmit for accreditation. To give you an idea, right now, there are multiple companies under accreditation review. Only, I think, less than 5 actually have the accreditation, but I welcome you to go to the MRC website to see how many companies actually have it. We've always held that above and said, wow, we were accredited. We continue to pursue that because our belief is we need third-party accreditation because we want to be fully transparent. Okay, so this isn't your grandmother's Nielsen, and where it was like, to Alan's, where it was 4 networks and we had boxes and a few across the country. This is a very different one with all of the changes happening, the rapid changes in technology. Well, all the way back in September of 2015, we added in Houston the ability to opt in for measurement from viewing from smartphones already and tablets. Then in January of 2019, we added to that internet connected devices like Roku's, Fire Sticks, Apple TV, Chromecasts. And then in October of 2019, we augmented the local people meter sample with over 1,000 portable people meter households. And what that meant is that we were able to not only increase the sample size, but provide insights in and out of home. And to that end, how do we measure this market? Market number 9. Now we're in the top 10 out of 208 measured markets, media markets. How do we measure Houston? We've got about 726 local people meters providing us 24/7 data from households and from persons in home. We add to that, we augmented that back in 2019, the over 1,000 portable people meter households, not persons, but households. And that allowed us to not only measure in home 24/7 directly, but also out of home. So now we can capture those guys who might be tailgating or watching at a sports bar, or maybe watching outside the home. Many offices, before the COVID, at least I remember, had the televisions on, or people go to other people's houses. We can capture more of that viewing. And then we added in digital television rating impressions. So these are non-Nielsen households that are watching through an app, your local stations, maybe on a YouTube TV or Paramount Plus, whatever it is. And we actually can capture those digital impressions and then credit it back to the local station. This market is over 17% BBO penetration, so it's slightly under the national average of 18.5. So right now, as we sit here in November, your television household size without broadband only is about 2.3 million television households. When we include all broadband only into the market in Houston, starting in January, that size will grow to 2.6 million television households. Go ahead to the next slide. But when we add broadband only, we're actually going to change the profile of the market. So we're going to change in a few ways. So it's not only just size that's affected, but other things. So in reality, 2.3 to 2.6, that's about 300,000 television households. But we dig deeper into that, and actually we're adding almost 500,000, 460,000 broadband only households. Okay, so we're adding actually more broadband only households because over this past year we've lost. Doesn't mean we've lost, they've gone away, they've converted, if you will. So these were former cable or satellite households homes who have chosen to cut the cord. Okay, so we've converted about 72,000 of those cable or satellite homes. And then we've also lost those over the air, those digital antenna households. So they've, maybe they got a new smart TV or an internet connected device, they are able to download their local apps, or maybe they got a YouTube TV, whatever, or they subscribe to that. They're watching their local content that way. So that's the first way we see a profile change. The next way we see the profile change is when we look at the types of households. So it's very different than traditional TV households. Broadband only homes tend to be younger, larger, and ethnically diverse. So for example, starting in January, when we add in those over 400,000 households to this market, the AOH stands for age of head under 35. That is the youngest group of household size of homeowners. We're going to add in about 162,000 more households when we add in those broadband only homes. We're going to add in for households with kids, another 168,000. Anybody with kids, I've got 4 of them, knows they control the remote, and you're out of luck watching on your smartphone in your car. Anyway, household size 3+, right? We're going to add to that. So larger households, more viewing. Hispanic households, almost 100,000 in this market, and Black households over 63,000. So definitely very different than our traditional households, which is going to impact viewing, right? And so as we move forward, what exactly is, I'm talking about these broadband only homes, what is a broadband only television household? So let's go into the definition. Okay. First and foremost, a broadband only home has to have at least one TV. So anyone asking, no, if you only have a laptop, that's not a television household. Okay, a broadband only home, and we're adding our traditional households right now are homes with a digital antenna. So that's an over-the-air household, one that subscribes to cable or satellite. Those are our traditional households as we sit here in November. We're adding this broadband only home. These broadband only homes have at least one TV that's in use, can't be stored, and is operable. Its internet is its only source, right? There's no cable, no satellite, no one can receive over the air. So some examples of broadband only homes would be a home that quote unquote cut the cord. They no longer have, cable or satellite. They can't receive over the air. And maybe they subscribe to a YouTube TV, which is a virtual MVPD. And they stream live TV through their internet-enabled smart TV via the YouTube TV app. That is a broadband only home. Or a home with a internet-enabled Apple TV that's connected. It does, again, no cable, no satellite, no over the air. All of their content's coming through that enabled Apple TV to watch. Or lastly, maybe it's a home that is connected a monitor or a television to an internet-enabled Xbox, and all they're watching is Crunchyroll, which is free online content, according to my son. All right, and they're watching all of this information through their TV. That's what a broadband-only home is. So our next question is, do broadband-only homes actually watch any local television, and why should we include broadband-only households in, right? So let's talk about that. First of all, again, all of this takes effect in January. We did delay it. First time was April, then October. This will all happen January 2022. The actual date is January 6th, 2022. Okay. And how does a broadband only home watch local content? Well, if they subscribe to a virtual MVPD, like a Fubo TV, Hulu Live, YouTube TV, or a direct TV streaming. Why these guys? Because included in your subscription to them are all the local channels. So just like if you had either Comcast or Cox or Spectrum and you watched on a set-top box, you pay a surcharge for your local access. Same thing with these virtual MVPDs. They carry all of the local stations and they pay that surcharge. Sling is another one, or Dish. Yes, they whether you have the orange or the green package, some of them carry NBC or Fox stations. There's different ways for you to watch local content. Other ways to watch local channels via a broadband internet connection, Paramount Plus, the app, right? Amazon Prime members can watch Thursday Night NFL via their connected devices. Local stations here in Houston have their own apps that provide linear feeds or simulstream their what's on the air, or you could just go out to the World Wide Web to a local station and access what's out there. And in a market like Houston with PPMs, you can access it away from home. So maybe you yourself don't have access to local, but you go over to a friend's house or you do it at work. So there's multiple ways of accessing. But now the question becomes, why include them? Well, as I mentioned on the national side, we've had them from 2013. And we know that there's a lot of viewing happening to local stations. The other thing is, we've talked about OTT, digital, all of these things. The fact is that it's really important to reach all the broadcast television households and to see every place your spot's being aired. And so far, by not including these homes, we haven't been representing totally the market, right? So this is really important for us to be able to see the total landscape and be able to see everywhere your spot's being seen in every type of household, beyond just the traditional households, because as we know, anything you can watch linear, you can watch digitally. And the fact of the matter is, I might understand how we're getting the content, but any one of my kids turns on a television, they have no idea, or their device, they don't know how the content's getting there. They just know it's there. And so we want to be agnostic to content or platform. We just want to measure what's being seen through the glass, whether that's the glass of the television, a device, your iPad, whatever it is. Okay. So the other thing that we're doing is we're adding in all of these households, right? We're going from 2.3 to 2.6 in terms of the size of the marketplace. That means we're doing a methodological change. We're changing the size of this universe. That means that the costs associated, next slide, with the rating point is changing. Okay, so now the value of a rating point here in Houston is going to be worth more because it's a larger sample, right? So the value of a 1 rating in Houston for 2554 is going to go up by 25% because it's going to, the size of the universe is larger. So when you're looking at your historical trends of cost per point, you're going to have to adjust because this is going to be a break in that trend line because you're having a change in the size of the marketplace, whether it's TV households, which is up by 13%, persons 18 to 34, it's up by almost 34%. That's how many more. So if you've been looking at the last few years and saying, hey, wait a minute, I know Houston's a growing market and my television UE is going down. It's not because people are moving out of Houston. It's because they were moving away from traditional types of households. And now we're going to capture them back in by including them in our sample. Okay. So next, we're going to talk about some additional resources to help you. And as Monica mentioned, there's multiple people on this call available to help you. Melanie Morris on the audio side, Lisa Trevino on my local TV side, and Monica who handles the market. So there's going to be impact data. There's going to be local monthlies, Nielsen Local Television View. We already have out there for you summarized data, impact reports with updated numbers for total BBO for 7 surveys. So January through July so far is available. You can request it from Monica. We also have a GRP calculator available on our Nielsen portal site, which allows you, if your comfort is buying in GRPs and you're off a campaign, 100 GRPs a month or whatever it is, or a week, you're able to go in there and actually see what the impression delivery would have been with or without BBO. So you can gauge where you need to be. So it's definitely available and it's out there for you to help with that. We've got webinars up the yin yang for you to see on different things. So if I'm talking too fast, you're like, oh, she's so annoying. There's other webinars you can definitely listen to. We also have created a dedicated agency resource center, and the address is over here. And that resource center has a lot of collateral, has a lot of explanations, a lot of recommendations on universe estimates. If you buy the RPD Plus markets, with former diary markets that already include broadband only since this past January, there's a lot of information about them and what we saw this past year and maybe what was different. So I urge you to go there if you haven't had an opportunity to do that so far. Okay. And with that, I'm going to talk about impressions. Okay, I know that there's some questions we're going to leave to the end, and I welcome the questions, but I'm going to go ahead and move to impressions. So why are we deciding to move to impressions now? It's been in the headlines for the past few years, and we are deciding to transition, not because this is a Nielsen move or we want to aggravate or upset your lifestyle. This has been happening. It started actually on an advertiser level many, many years ago. And if you think about it, whether it's a network or a group holding company, whatever it is, oh, could you go back, please? Yeah, so regardless of what it is, this metric is already being used for digital, outdoor, or print. The benefit to shift away from percentages to actually count numbers of people is a way for full transparency. When we use ratings, we kind of shave off, right? Because you're rounding a lot of times. Buying on impression removes the silos that we're going to talk about in the next slide from that environment. When we count viewers as impressions, we kind of simplify the ability to actually evaluate across mediums. And impressions is a common, simple metric. You don't want to call it impressions, eyeballs, viewers, whatever you'd like. Next slide. And so when I mentioned the silos, so today, each one of these medias has its own metric, right? Local television, local TV is average quarter hour, as Monica shared with you. And the reality is that, you know, that's our standard. But when you talk about OTT or digital, right, there is no real standard. The IAB hasn't come out with standard, whether you negotiate 2 seconds is a unique impression, 10 seconds, 30, the completion of the banner. The reality, it's more fungible. So for Nielsen, the first step is to identify what is an impression, and is an impression in television, are we going to count it the same as we do digital, and vice versa, right? So for us, the first step is, when we look at digital versus TV, is duration, right? So an average 5 minutes in an average quarter hour is how we credit. 5 minutes in a quarter hour gives you a credit in local television. All right, so 5 minutes is 300 seconds. So then do we say, if we say the digital impression is 10 seconds, do we say, oh, it takes 30 digital impressions to equal 1 TV impression? Well, that's one way of doing it. But the other question is not only time duration, is engagement, right? So, you know, that is the concern, right? So we want to take this opportunity for both the buyers and sellers, agencies and your different vendors to look at impressions. They're not all created equal, but we're going to have to figure out a way, because again, anything linear is available digitally. And so we want to be able to provide a holistic view at what the media universe is, the landscape, and be able to negotiate and transact on impressions, on viewers, on eyeballs, right? And so this move to impressions is the first step in providing that. So if you come from digital, this totally makes sense. If you're not from traditional, where you've been buying GRPs per week in a campaign, it's going to take some getting used to. But don't worry, Nielsen's not doing away with ratings. We're still producing ratings. We will continue. Every one of your buying and planning systems has ratings or impressions. So I think the question is, it's just going to make it a little bit easier. And lastly, it's important to use this because, next slide, please, is that when we're looking at this, the common metrics, it's going to give us the ability to analyze and sell across these platforms seamlessly. And will also help us understand what is a totally unique audience to linear and what is a totally unique audience to digital, and where can we find the efficiencies in both, right? And so it's really important. And you know, we know this is a change in the attitudes over the last few months, and I'll tell you why. Nielsen conducted a survey in in October of 2019, where we asked our agencies, our smaller agencies, hey, are you thinking about moving to impressions? At that time, almost 68%, 67.9% said no way. Okay. Fast forward, we did the same survey this past August of 2021, and that number dropped to 46%. So what does that tell us? Is that the needle's moving, more and more people are understanding it. We are not in any way saying you have to go with it, but Nielsen stands behind this because we think it's to the benefit of our clients overall, because with impressions, you can understand the delivery across multiple media and figure out where's the most efficiency and the biggest bang for your buck. And with that, I'm going to transfer it back over to Monica.
Yeah, no, Claudine, I think that it also relates to radio. Impressions is not new to radio either. It was something that I know when we went originally back in 2007, 2008, we went to electronic measurement. We had to start looking at impressions on the radio side because the stations got compressed. And I have an example here in Houston, and this is today for radio. And when we talk about impressions, I look at it from two perspectives, right? There's AQH persons. Really, impressions are when you start to put together a buy and you put in the number of spots on the radio stations, then you start generating impressions. But when you're looking at AQH ratings, the impressions in radio are AQH persons. And so as it relates to radio, impressions are helpful to differentiate stations that have the same rating. So here's an example on the left-hand side where you see the stations that are ranked on AQH rating, and next are on the right-hand side ranked on AQH persons. And you can clearly see that the ranking order for the first 5 stations versus having 3 stations tied at number 1 and another 5 stations tied at number 2. So from a much more directional and tactical perspective, AQH persons is a very good best practice to look at them. The other thing too that I think is something that is not just unique to radio, but as you start to look at hour by hour of the day, evenings tend to be very, very low, and on some stations non-existent if you're looking at ratings. Now, if you look at AQH persons, which is that purple line going, you can clearly see peaks and valleys of the audience flow. And that's really unique in terms of radio will have different audience flow depending on what segments of that station are popular or when people are listening or tuning in, depending on their commuter times. So again, looking at impressions and ratings side by side has been I think a best practice from the radio stations for quite some time. And not to mention that as we, very similar to television in regards to digital, we know that audience is fragmented, whether it's, the stations did and invested a lot of money in the radio stations on their websites and then eventually on apps, whether it was the iHeartRadio app or the Euphoria app, La Musica, lots of radio apps that are very, very popular. And it's generating some of the similar content. They're trying to recycle that audience. And what you're seeing here is that it's a quarter of their audience. So when you think about time spent listening, that's something else to take into consideration is that some of that audience didn't leave radio. It just got pushed to digital forms. And I will say that in COVID, podcasts, very much like streaming on the video side, podcast has been very, very popular as well. And what we see is that more listening is happening at home. People who are staying at home and didn't go back to the office have picked up podcast listening as well. So again, as we continue to look from either television, radio, digital streaming, all types of media consumption, we want to make sure that we continue to stay abreast of all these changes. And we want to continue being a champion. As Claudine said, we're not taking away gross rating points. We're not taking GRPs. As a matter of fact, you should be continually looking at them and understanding how do they relate in your market to that station, to that day part, to that demo, and how does that look from an impressions level? So we're just simply encouraging to move our business forward and evolve with the transformation of media consumption to look as gross impressions as an equalizer across media platforms. And that way we can all have a better understanding of the return on investment for our brands that are investing in these audiences, because we want to make sure too that our measurement continues to improve so that we can continue to be an inclusive and representative measurement as possible. And with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to the audience who has been waiting so patiently to ask us questions. So please feel free to let us know what your thoughts are.
Thank you, Monica and Claudine. So we do have some questions in the queue, and I'll start asking them. The first question has to do with time shifting in LPM markets. This is for television. Is live only still an option when reporting TV viewership in LPM markets? Historically, we've been able to look at live, live +1, live +3, live +7. It seems on at least one buying software where live only is no longer an option.
Thanks so much. So it's true, we did take away live only, and the reason is because several reasons. Basically, it's because of the different platforms and devices. So we used to have, when you had one television and one source, it was a certain second threshold. And what we discovered was, depending on the type of device you're using, whether we used to call it buffering or such, the timing. So we decided to only go with live same day, which is, I think it's within 3 hours. And then you have live +1. So live only is no longer an option for reporting purposes for LPM markets. It might be available in custom, but in terms overall, especially with the different devices and with impressions from digital television ratings and things like that, live only was taken away as a reporting data stream.
Okay. Next question has to do with BBO. So I hope I'm asking this correctly. Based on impact data books that we've been getting for a year now, BBO homes were defined as homes that could and did watch local TV here in Houston. After January, the definition is all BBO homes, whether or not they watched local TV. So after January, does BBO have to be local?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So yes, we did change it. So originally we called for, I believe it was a year. So it was going to be a year of using what we call qualified broadband only homes that either had access through a virtual MVPD to local stations and or had passed a tuning test. Starting in January, there will be no need to do the tuning test, and we will include all broadband only households. That being said, they're local broadband only homes in Houston, but there's no requirement in them to view local content. That being said, what we have seen over the last now over a year of looking at Houston homes, depending on the month, obviously, but the last time we looked at this before the summer, we saw that approximately in all local people meter markets, more than 86% of all homes had watched local content. So would have passed that tuning test. So it's really going to be content driven, whether or not those homes are watching local, but again, it will all broadband only homes, regardless of whether or not they have passed the tuning test or such.
Okay. Next question. When will we be able to pull out of home viewing through NLTV? Will we be able to pull viewing from BBO only via NLTV, or will it be a special requested report?
So the best of my knowledge, pulling out of home viewing through NLTV is still not a capability. I know we have it on the national side, but that's a custom report. On the local side, I don't think we have that ability as of yet. There are plans in the future to add more data sets. Maybe at that point, it will become something you can pull up, but at this point, there is no planned time for that. The second question, I think eventually what you'll see is the fact that today by custom, you can pull like in an NLTV, which stands for Nielsen Local Television View, which is a Nielsen software product that many of our clients utilize. That broadband only will be a universe, like you can pull cable only, satellite only, over the air only, and eventually I believe you'll be able to pull BBO only. I do not know when that capability will be there, but eventually we are treating it as a separate universe that makes up the marketplace.
Okay, thank you. Next question has to do with national spot buying agencies and how they are adopting to impressions-based buying. Are they on board with this? And if so, what do you think their timing is of using impressions-based currency?
So I'm assuming National Spot is like the national group holding company.
Yes.
So they actually have been ahead of the curve. They started over 5 years ago. Approximately 85%, if not more, have already transitioned to impressions. So that they might be planning on GRPs, but they're executing on impressions. There are a few, I think it's almost up to 90%. Their goal is to get as high as possible. The issue there is by client. So there are certain clients that want to retain and continue to transact on ratings. I've spoken to some of them, but overall, we're seeing that a large proportion of them have already moved to impressions. So that's their comfort level. And remember that any post analysis, any post campaign analysis that's being done, whether it's on a national or regional level, is already being converted into impressions.
So when we convert, when we start getting the official books after January, is there a lag period from that point to when we should start posting off of impressions, or do we start right away in first quarter?
No. After you get the January 2022, I mean, you could even do it now for fourth quarter on impressions, because we're providing it. But yeah, I mean, whenever you transition over, I mean, we already have a lot of clients that have transitioned to posting on impressions right away.
Okay. Next question. What's the benefit of Nielsen's approach to measurement versus some other measurement services that use more large scale data?
Great, great question. Thank you for it. Nielsen's belief is that we measure people, the video, and not devices. So, you know, we've been working with big data now for multiple years. We have that in our 137 markets. Eventually, we'll have it in the top 56 markets like Houston. We love big data. It's great for stability and such. There's a few problems though. It's measuring devices. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm constantly switching inputs on my screen. And so if I'm only measuring the box, I don't know when it's on Netflix. I don't know when it's gone out to look at, you know, another area. By choosing to continue to measure what's coming through the glass, the video, the audio, we're getting a more, if you will, I would say more concrete understanding of the audience. The other thing is, even though it's passé for many, we still believe in panels. We believe in people getting that direct person's measurement, you know, whether it's through apps by, you know, being in people's phones and different devices. You know, there's a reason that companies across the country, whether it's NFL.com, Comcast Xfinity, Paramount Plus, NBC Everywhere, all of these, Roku, YouTube TV, they have actually put the Nielsen software development kit into their systems. If you go out to the Apple or Google store today and you look in the permissible uses for any of those apps, those virtual MVPDs, Nielsen's tracking you because those companies believe in our measurement. The other thing I have to say is that we believe that it has to be, we believe we're still the protectors of the currency. And for that reason, we can't just willy-nilly choose like one day to get, you know, a data provider has a problem and you don't have 400,000 boxes, you have 40,000. We believe that you have to have a local panel that's local to Houston, right? You can't have a panel, people in other markets, we want to have a panel that sits here. We have local field staff that live in the market, and that it's about people. So we want to make sure that we're only measuring what's coming through the glass or the device glass. We also want to make sure that we're being clear, we're getting everything in the home, which is why we have the streaming meter, which means we're not only metering your devices for content, we're also now putting a meter by your router to understand how you're getting that content, right? So you're watching something. Did you get it through Hulu? Did you go directly to the network? How did you get that information? Because what we want to provide is a whole 360 view of everything. There are competitors out there that are, I love the scale and size, and let's be honest, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have pushed to this innovation. So I'm grateful for that. However, you know, it's not enough just to do devices. It's not enough just to do smart TV data, because again, it's not representative. The other thing is there's no one out there that's actively pursuing the ethnic audience, right? There's no one out there talking about Hispanics. There's no one out there actively talking about African Americans or Asians. And the fact of the matter is that is something that we truly believe in. You have to have a completely representative sample. You have to be able to show that across the board. And that's why we're moving towards that. We continue to double down with that in terms of providing that information. So that's what kind of sets us apart, because you're not just through it. I don't know about the rest of you. Nobody is tethered anymore to set-top box, right? We're watching content while we're standing in or driving through the Starbucks line. We're watching content at airports. We're watching content everywhere. And we have to be able to measure it everywhere.
Great, thank you for that answer. Okay, last question. This is kind of a follow-up from the very first question about time shifting. Since we cannot get live only, can we get commercial ratings / impressions for time shifted viewing?
You know what? In local, I'm hoping that comes about. But whether that's a C3, which is a national concept, C3, commercial plus 3 days, commercial plus 7 days. The hope is in the future to be able to provide that on a local level, right? To be able to provide that. Right now, that's not a capability that's out there. I shouldn't say that. We have the capability, we're not reporting that at this time because we can obviously get minute by minute. In local, we're still defaulting to the quarter hour and to total day. But yeah, I mean, I think for the future, you'll definitely have that.
Okay. That concludes our Q&A. So thank you guys, very well done. And thank you for all the participants. It was good to see this kind of turnout. Amanda, back to you.
Yes. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. Thank you, Nielsen. We really appreciate all of your insight. I know we had one question about whether or not we'll be able to distribute the presentation today. Are y'all okay with distributing it to anyone that requests it?
Yes, thank you. We'd love to.
Perfect. So I know that I've been sent the PowerPoint, so I am going to drop my email address into the chat. And if you would like to be sent the PowerPoint, feel free to reach out to me and I will send that on to you. Thanks everyone for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you again in December. And get ready to buy some tables for Gala. Thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.